The final listening context that we're going to explore would be organizational context. There are a number of relationships that we have in the organizations that we work and the organizations that we choose to be a part of because we affiliate with them because of maybe a cause or because of a service that they do or because we enjoy the social network that's involved. And these relationships include a co-worker or co-volunteer, supervisor-subordinate relationships across a vertical hierarchy, interdepartmental, and even interorganizational relationships that develop over time. And these relationships are wrought many times with tension related to the structures of the organization or in terms of the personalities or behaviors of certain people. And you have to learn how to work alongside other people, which is not always easy. And if you've ever had to do group work, if you've taken group communication, you understand that group work is not always easy. It can be quite difficult at times. Now, in terms of an organizational context, to be a good listener means that you're going to seek various viewpoints. You want heterogeneous groups of people, that is, groups that are diversified, that have different points of view, maybe from different backgrounds, different educational interests, have different hobbies, have different experiences. And what you want is you want to find those people that are the authority within the group, so that are authorities on that issue that you're interested in, and you want to defer to them. That's what Carl Weick calls a deference to authority, and Carl Weick is sort of the guru of organizational science research. Also, you want to probe deeper. You want to learn as much as you can and get to the underlying issues that are involved. And so that means asking a lot of questions. You don't want to judge other people when you're listening to them in organizations. You want to hear them out, which can be difficult because many times you're sensitive about your own work performance and about how other people are viewing you. And so you have a tendency to be oversensitive about other people's work performance. And you have a tendency to compare and contrast yourself to them. Like, I did such and such and they didn't do near as much work on that. And so you can end up judging them rather than just listening to them. Also, in your interorganizational relationships and intra-organizational relationships, you want to seek multiple opinions. And that will help you to gather how people feel about a given issue. You want to record information, especially if you're in a group meeting of some kind. You want a place where it's visible for people for you to record what's going on during the group discussion. Also, you want to neutralize the listening environment, especially if conflict is involved. You don't want anyone to feel like one person has the upper hand over them. You want to try to neutralize power imbalances. And so, for example, when the boss calls you into her office or his office, you're playing on their turf, aren't you? That's their ground, isn't it? And so if it's amidst a conflict and you're trying to help maybe mediate that conflict, you wouldn't want to have the meeting that you're mediating in an office of one of the people in conflict. So it would make one person feel more uncomfortable than the other person. You want to try to neutralize the listening environment also in terms of the rapport that you have with people and by demonstrating that you want to listen to them. So it's not just the physical environment, but it's also the relational environment. You want to brainstorm and you want to listen to different people's ideas during brainstorming sessions, and you want to get as many ideas as possible. And you want to apply problem-solving methods, especially if you're in a problem-solving committee that's trying to get to the root of an issue and develop a solution. And the problem-solving method usually involves the following steps, where you identify first what the problem is, then you need to then define the problem and analyze the problem to see who's affected, how important this problem is, and to see how extensive it is. Then you move on to developing criteria for solutions and then brainstorming different solutions, evaluating them in light of the criteria before you move on to selecting a best solution. And then at some point you're going to need to develop a plan for evaluating your solution after you implement it. So that's basically your problem-solving methods. And in that process, and if you've taken group communication, you know the importance of not allowing groupthink to occur. And so if you're seeking various viewpoints and seeking various opinions and you're brainstorming and trying to establish a neutral listening environment, hopefully you can avoid the problems related to groupthink. And groupthink is where everyone assumes that everyone else thinks a certain way and they don't voice any concerns that they have or disagreeing viewpoints or any opposing viewpoints. So you want a good mix of people who feel free to express themselves. But that's not always the case in terms of organizational environment, because you can experience a variety of issues that are problematic, and you can approach them a variety of ways, which can exacerbate the problem or can find a path to a solution. We're going to look at a number of different things that can affect your listening context in organizations that can be problematic for you and how you might try to overcome them. Emotional labor is when we have to perform emotions as a part of our job. Hochschild did a lot of work on emotional labor, and one of the problems though with her work, with Hochschild's work, is that it kind of presented a dichotomy between fake self and real self, and that when you performed emotions, that was your fake self. But if you value your job and you think you need your job and you perform emotions as a part of your job, then that's part of who you are. And so a lot of people have really taken aim at Hochschild's work. There's some really interesting work on emotional labor. One of my favorite pieces of work on it is by Miller from Texas A&M, and she did some research after the bonfire collapse at Texas A&M, and she was talking about how she didn't, as a professor, know how to respond in many ways to her students, and she studied emotions. And she studied emotions in the workplace, and how you're not really trained or prepared, professionally speaking, to handle heightened emotional states. But emotions come in many different forms. They can come from conflict. They can come from a disaster like the one at Texas A&M. They can come from family issues that you're facing. They can come from a physical ailment. They can come from expectations related to the norms of the workplace. So there can be lots of sources of it, but it can also contribute oftentimes to burnout. And in the service industry, that's what they found. Tracy has done a lot of work with service industry research, and she has looked actually at cruise ships, and she went on a couple cruises, and you think, oh, poor her, but she looked at the workers on cruise ships and how they became very burnt out and had high turnover rates because they were constantly on. They were never off work. They were in a total institution where they were always at work, and the emotional labor was just too much for many of them. Another thing that can affect our listening context at work is perceptions and motives, that is other people's motives. If we view them as being altruistic or if we view them as being devious, it can affect the way that we subsequently interact with them and interpret the messages. And so really and truly it's very difficult to judge anyone's motives. And understanding that when you ascribe motives, it usually leads to conflict, and conflict escalation can be a really important warning sign for us when we begin to do that. Conflict escalation in the workplace can affect how we listen. We tend to be more judgmental when we're in conflict with other people. We have a tendency not to listen when we're in conflict and only see our viewpoint. We become very egocentric and retreat in self rather than recognizing where the other person is coming from. And so listening can be difficult during conflict escalation, and I would really encourage you to realize some of the impacts that conflict escalation has on the listening context, and that it can really impact your ability to reach a resolution with them. Bullying affects the listening context in the workplace. We can oftentimes feel intimidated or bullied by our coworkers, and it may be their physical stature, it may be their position of authority, it may be the way that they joke with us in inappropriate ways, it may be that they call us on the carpet in very rude and demeaning ways and make us feel like we're not worth anything. Bullying is commonplace in organizations, and also favoritism is, which I think is sometimes linked to bullying because we might deem that we're the unfavorite when we're being bullied. And favoritism can lead to a lot of job dissatisfaction, as can be the effects of bullying. It's a little bit more difficult to do something about favoritism because it can be difficult to prove. However, bullying, which can be linked to harassment in some cases and discrimination, is not easier to prove, but it's easier to talk about and lots of times work through. Discrimination and harassment is legally protected, but many times people don't report it, and so it's important that you know what your rights are and that you speak to your human resource department where you work. Knowing who your coworkers are, your supervisors, and who you can go to when you have a problem in your listening context is very important. You need to be familiar with your human resource department and know that you can go there and talk to them when you have problems, because you have a lot of negative impact stress-wise when you have dissatisfaction in your job. And if you can increase satisfaction in any way, of course you would want to, and improve your work environment.